All right, back in the basement again today to talk about one of my favorite variations of all time, and that is the deficit deadlift. And there's a couple of reasons why I really like this movement. Number one, far and away, the biggest reasons for me is I have trouble getting it up off the floor. If I take a look at the history of my deadlifts, anytime I fail to lift, it's usually because I can't get it past that first 6 inches or break the ground or I exert so much energy doing so, I don't have very thing left in the tank to get that lift up. If I can get it past my mid shin, there's a 99% chance that the lift is going to be completed. I don't typically run into issues at lockout or grip strength or anything like that. It's just getting it up, which is always the hardest part. Or maybe it's the softest part. I don't know. There's a bad joke to be made in there somewhere. So number one, far and away for me, it's because it translates to where my weak point is my deadlifts, which is one of the reasons I like it. However, another big reason I like it overall is that it's a very easy lift to do in terms of what you need. So it's not like you need to have a lot of extra equipment. Chances are you actually have everything you need to already do it. And it's not going to be a significant variation from the main movement where it's going to really mess you up or you need to change a lot of things. Case in point here, I like to do mine with stall mats. You guys know already, I've done a ton of videos on stall mats. I think they're great for home gym for flooring, but they have a lot of extra use if you have extra pieces, which I just so happen to have. So what I have here is 2 pieces of stall mat. They reach about 1 foot by 2 feet. So it's actually part of a strip that I cut off because most stall mats that I recommend are 4 feet by 6 feet. So this is about like a 4-foot strip. And all I did is cut it in half. And this is big enough for me to use in a conventional deadlift and basically place my feet anywhere that I would see fit. Any wider and it's not conventional. And it also gives me the perfect height in my opinion, which is about 1.5 inches. Now you could go less. I wouldn't recommend going less than 1 inch because then can you even feel it at that point? And I wouldn't recommend going much over 2 inches because in that case, I think you then start to have to really compromise or change your form up in order to accommodate. So somewhere between 1 to 2 inches is the sweet spot. And each stall mat being 3/4 of an inch thick, it's really easy to adjust here. So I could use 1 for about 3/4 of an inch, 2 for 1.5 inches, which I use here, bump up 1 more, and I'm at 2.25. So it's all around that sweet spot, which I think is the perfect range. Now, also, if you're deadlifting on something like a wooden platform or where the floor could be slick, stall mats grip really, really well, so they're not going to be sliding around, which is an issue I faced in the past if someone were to use steel plates specifically, or bumper plates even. Those things can tend to move depending on if you're pulling conventional or sumo in some cases, in which case if you're a sumo puller, I'm sorry to hear that, but you might want to double up on the stall mats. That way you can put it exactly where your feet need to be. But also you can cut these to size so they fit your foot. Again, I've dealt with plates that don't really fit the best, or maybe they're too thick, or maybe they're not completely flat, or again, they're sliding around. Stall mats you're not going to really have an issue with. I have also in the past, if you remember back to my commercial gym days, I actually made a wooden deficit platform, which actually worked really well, but it was heavy, it was bulky, and it wasn't as easy to adjust because it was a fixed amount. In this case, like I said, you can just slap stall mats on and use them. In this instance, if you're doing things like box squats, these are also a great way to kind of micro adjust that pad, if you will, if your box doesn't adjust accordingly. So stall mats are super useful for any aspect of the gym, and case in point, you might already have them already. So I prefer stall mats for this particular movement, but again, use what you gotta use. The other big reason I really like this is because when I take a look at a deficit deadlift from a form perspective, what we're basically doing here is increasing the range of motion. In this case, 1.5 inches, which is enough, but not too much as I've already stated. Case in point is when I get down here into position, and I'll try to show you some video as well, this isn't too far of a stretch from my normal deadlifting position, which is great because I'm not having to widen my stance, I'm not having to widen my grip, I don't have to change the mechanics too much so that when I go back to a traditional from the floor pull, I'm still in a very similar position and I'm still moving that same movement pattern to kind of train that way, and I don't have to readapt to a different form or anything like that. So I can strengthen the position that I'm in by just increasing the range of motion by 1 inch or 2. And the thought process here, which I found carries over very, very well, is like if you're pulling from the floor and then you switch to like a block pull, so you're elevating the weights to decrease the range of motion, most people can block pull more than they can pull from the floor because again, there is a less range of motion in play. So the thought process here is a little bit opposite. So we're increasing the range of motion from a normal pull to make it more difficult. So when you go back to a normal from the floor pull, you should be more powerful in that position because you're in a greater position of advantage. So that's one of the big reasons that I like deficit deadlifts, in addition to them being easy and cheap to do and not having to change form too much. So the way that I typically like to program these in, if I'm not on a specific program, And if I'm on a specific program, I try to adjust it so it can happen is I typically do like 2 deadlifting movements a week for the most part. Maybe outside of like peak training where everything's really heavy, where I might go down to like 1 time per week just because I get super fatigued from deadlifts. I find that if I do deadlifts like twice a week, I'll typically do a from the floor pull 1 time and also do a deficit pull another time, typically adding the deficit pull onto when I'm doing a squatting movement. So like after my main squatting movement for the day, I might have a bench movement and then the deadlifting movement, which would be deficits. And because they're harder to do, you can't go as heavy. So I still find that I can get those in, which is a really good movement in my opinion, has good carryover, but still have energy for later in the week when I'm doing my from the floor pulls. Now, if you don't have stall mats available, you still want to increase the range of motion on your lifts, you can still do that. There's other ways to do it. A very simple, easy way to be is if you have a pair of 35-pound plates or multiple pairs of 35-pound plates or plates that are just less in diameter than a 45-pound plate would be, just put those on instead. Since they are a lesser diameter, they're going to bring the bar close to the floor, in which case would make you have to pull a longer range of motion. So those 35s also have tons and tons of use, just like the stall mats that I've already mentioned. That's one way to do it where your form is not going to be tremendously compromised because again, very similar movement. You put your hands in the same place, your body moves in the same way. Another way is to do a snatch grip deadlift, which as the actual name implies, you're just going to be taking a wider grip, in which cases, because your arms are not as long, you're going to have a longer range of motion to complete the pull. That will work as well, although I find those don't have as good of carryover for me because again, you're changing drastically your form by increasing that grip width. But again, still a way to increase the range of motion to make the deadlift more difficult and then thus carry over to your competition from the floor pull. So deficit deadlifts to me, game changer. When I have those consistently in my program, I find my deadlift is at its strongest. Let me know what you think about them in the comment section below, or if there's any questions I can answer for you on them. In the meantime, as always, thanks for watching and stay big.